All right, the Knicks FBI is here. We're investigating Dennis Smith Jr. jump shot. We're hearing things. We don't know if we can verify them.
Take note.
Big Beach. We're here.
I'm an allergist.
It's different this time.
What's up, guys? What's up, guys? So today we're looking at Dennis Smith Jr. jump shot, and if you can count on it for the upcoming season. Now, as you remember, Dennis Smith Jr. last year, just a horror campaign. Horrible on the court. His life was horrible off the court. He had a lot going on. So I do really feel for him. He had, his mom died. His stepmom passed away during the season. He had physical injuries. His back was injured. On the court, he just kept making horrible decisions. He got booed off the court a couple times. In fact, when you look at Dennis Smith Jr., what kept happening last year was he was basically put out there when it was like a tie game or a close game. And within 5 minutes of him being out there, we'd be down 10 points. And it would very clearly be either his poor defense or just his inability to shoot or his indecisiveness. You just saw a player that just kind of just didn't know what to do. It looked like the Monstars took his talent, like Pat back in '96. This report comes out today from the New York Daily News that he's been working on a jump shot all summer in close contact with shooting legend Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. If you know him from the 90s, you know he was a sharpshooter back then before sharpshooting was really a thing to like the level it is now. And he's been working with him. He's been working with him on a jumper on his release. Especially, they've been doing conditioning drills to make sure that Dennis can not only shoot well, but shoot well when he's tired. We will take a look at this article a little bit, and then I have an expert coming on, and we're gonna analyze how much we can really believe in the Dennis Smith Jr. jump shot. All right, so there's a couple things I just want to talk about here. So Raymond Brothers, his agent, put the two together in the offseason. Smith works out with Raul 5 days a week, and has done so for months since safely being allowed to do so in the aftermath of COVID. He says he's in the best shape of his life. Yeah. The offseason has not seen a whole restructuring of a jump shot, but a couple components needed overhaul. So first off, ridding himself of unnecessary movement. His split-second jump shot was a byproduct of a flick of the wrist. He's been hammering that into Dennis Smith, who's using his arms in the shape of an L, like a catapult, to generate firepower. Shout out to Larry Johnson. As a byproduct of that, he said he was blocking his own sight to the rim. So don't shout out to Larry Johnson for that. But I get it, right? You're right here. You can't see to the rim, so makes sense. Mahmoud is a better shooter than I ever was. He says here, we talk about taking away necessary stress and getting rid of wasted energy. There's so many levels to get the quick shot, not just fast switch muscles, but even technique, etc., etc. And the last thing I want to get into here is what hasn't been fixed. The last part Smith and Abdul-Rauf haven't quite fixed yet is his flick of the wrist. Smith's wrist flicks to its side when he releases to shoot. Again, if it ain't broke, don't overfix it. In this practice gym, Smith's shot looks more fixed than it's ever been. Doubt. Doubt. We will see. Now, if you remember last year, Dennis Smith Jr., the Knicks PR campaign, Dennis Smith's own PR campaign, they went in. There was that video of him, training in North Carolina, I think, with his shirt off, pushing stuff in a field. Like he was fit, and they did say that he set conditioning records. So obviously, physically, at least in terms of fitness, he was fine. But there's probably a good chance he maybe overworked himself, which led to injuries. But there was a big push by the Knicks media and Dennis Smith himself last year about his improvement and what we're going to see from him going forward. Last year was really supposed to be the year he kind of took off. You know what I mean? He was supposed to take off, take the starting point role, and just run with it. Obviously, he bottoms out at the bottom of the roster after his year last year. And now they're saying that he reworked it again, and this has happened before. I'm going to point out a couple times. As you can see here, there are times in the last few years, even back to Dallas and Rick Carlisle, where there are a lot of talk about Dennis Smith Jr. and his reworked jump shot and how good it is this time, and now it's going to be a whole different DSJ, and it's been a different experience on the court. I'm going to turn it over to the expert here, and we're going to really look at specific elements of his shot back then at NC State, at Dallas, and now, and see what has happened, what has changed, and even with the the new updates as he's gotten so much better, how much better has he gotten? How much cleaner does his form look? All right, so my man Presidente from the Strickland is going to break down for you guys what Dennis Smith Jr.'s shot was like, what it's like now, and what it's going to be.
We've all seen what Dennis' jump shot looks like when he was on the Knicks, and even before that on the Mavericks, where it was seriously busted, and it's part of the reason why he ended up being basically benched. He's not some high field genius level point guard, so his game coming out of NC State was pretty much, I got a jump shot that's good enough that you get it a little, and I'm fast enough and athletic enough that I can get by you if you get close to me. But if the defender gives him 5-10 feet, then it doesn't matter that he's the most athletic player on the floor. So when he lost that jump shot, the rest of his game just completely crowned him, and he didn't really know what to do because he's not the kind of point guard to really think about the game like that. Like he was getting blatantly affected by guys. I remember we were playing the Nets and DeAndre Jordan was not moving from the paint. I don't care what you do. And DSJ hesitated from three and then dribbled in like about 18 feet to take a long two that was closer and just completely bricked it. You know, we hear all this, the news about him and revamping his jump shot, and we've literally heard that every summer, right? Like, it was with Keith Smart. The summer before that, it was with, I forget his name, Steph Curry's trainer. They're both from North Carolina, so they knew the same guy. I forget his name, but we haven't really seen actually happen to it. But, you know, we did get some footage of his jumper, both today and about 2 months ago in September when the Knicks players were first getting together. It looks improved from last year for sure. I mean, he only could go up from last year, really. But you could see he's trying to make it a little more smooth. At NC State, his shot was much more smooth than it was in the NBA. He did sometimes have a little hitch, or how I like to describe it for folks who play 2K or play NBA type video games out there. He would sometimes hold the shoot too long. And actually, he would do that mostly on every jump shot. So you could tell that he was working on both in footage we got and in footage for September that he's trying to shoot on the way up and not as close to the peak of his jump to shoot on the way down, which is a big no-no. There's really three things. There was shooting on the way down that was a problem. It was him changing his jump height and jumping really high sometimes. In NC State, sometimes he jumped high, sometimes he jumped less high, and that's been the whole problem this whole time is even on his good-looking jump shots, like he's just not consistent in his form. Sometimes he would jump higher, sometimes he would jump lower. Kid has had a 40-inch first, probably like 15, so it's probably hard for him not to jump high, which sounds like a weird thing. This for jumping high is easier than jumping high physically, but if you're used to just jumping out of the gym, it could be tough. And it's only recently that you've really seen, you know, the good shooters of the NBA who are guards, the wave of guards who don't jump that high and have a lower release. Like that's a newer thing with Steph, with Trey, Tyrese Maxey, Manuel Quickly. Like most of the time back in the day, in the 90s, you used to see a lot of players jump really high on their jump shots, but the game goes on and you get bumped and you get thrown on the floor and you get tired. So it's really hard to be a hopping jump shooter and be consistent. That's why Ray was so incredible. He would jump really high. That's why he got calves that look like softball, because that's just how he rolls. But for most today, that's a big no-no. And then the third thing was he would take his non-shooting hand off the ball really early and then basically one-handed kind of catapults. And I mean, that's why you saw him sometimes airball free throws and things like that, because your guide hand as a guide, if you pause anybody's, even good shooters, like at some point it does become a one-handed shot, right? Because like, no, this isn't volleyball, right? You're not doing a volleyball set. So you can pause Damian Lillard and Steph, and at some point it's one hand doing the shooting. But with Dennis, the hand goes really far off. Like you could fit like a few inches between there, and it's really weird. Like it comes off a lot, and the time between it coming off and the shot getting off his fingertips is a long time, and that's how you end up airballing free throws. You know, it's good to see them not only doing stationary drills, because you have to be able to pull up as a point guard from mid-range, and you're going to be tired, right? So you have to change the circumstance under which you're shooting. The best thing in this video to me is just look how far he gets off the ground, and it's really not that far, which is what you want to see. And Grant in this video is super close, so it's like, obviously you don't need to jump super high or put a lot of physical effort into it, but that was one of his big problems, was sometimes jumping way too high. This was my favorite shot in the few clips that we've seen. He comes down the sideline and you can see he doesn't jump that high again. The hitch isn't really there, and it looks like his guide hand doesn't come off early, which is the hardest thing I think for him to change. So this looks good. The 5 of 8 thing, like whoop-de-doo, like I suck at shooting. I could go 5 for 8 in an empty gym. Usually the back of the napkin numbers that you hear from like coaches and trainers is if you go into an empty gym and shoot 100 3-pointers, you shoot whatever percentage you shoot, divide that by 2, and that's what you'd shoot in an NBA. Yeah, so this one I think looks more like the jump shot we saw last year. Quite as busted, but his guide hand comes off real early. You can see he kind of holds it and hitch at the end, and it's kind of hard to tell in fast speed and from this camera. There's some funny wrist action going on, which I think MAR mentioned, or I don't know, maybe it was Christian as the author in the article. One of them mentioned it, that was another thing that they're working on, is like him flicking to the side a little bit, and it looks like that's what happened in this video. I mean, the ball still went in, but you know, when I'm looking at these off-season videos, I don't really care quite. It sounds ridiculous, but I don't really care quite as much as if the shot goes in, just because, you know, they're editing footage, and anyone with a busted shot can still make a bunch of shots, right? Like I could do that. I'm just looking at the process and the mechanics. He's better at shooting on the way up now, at least in these practice videos. But the other two about jumping high or not jumping high, or and then the guide hand, those still seem to be issues from these videos. It sounds like I'm nitpicking, but really, unfortunately, that's what shooting comes down to. It's hard to a lot of different things in one summer. You can find me on the strict.land, where I write mostly about the draft and also about player development, which is super fascinating to me. I did some player development and draft writing at Posting and Toasting. And you can find me on Twitter at _PREZIDENTE.
All right, guys, so hope you enjoyed that. Let me know, do you believe in Dennis Smith Jr.'s jump shot? I got to see it to believe it. I do think he's going to be far better this year than he was last year. Fizz was a terrorist as a coach, and he's a terrible terrorist. He basically bombed all the expectations last year. I expect everyone's going to do better this year, especially with the developmental staff in place. If Dennis has been putting in the work, you know, he's been a lot more quiet this year on social media, which I do like. So let's see what happens. Take care, guys. Peace. See you guys next video.